The internet has always had its fair share of seemingly absurd obsessions and trends. Be it with the consumption of Tide Pods, our everlasting obsession with cute cat videos, or trying to trade your way up to a house by starting with only a paperclip. What's fascinating is that very often, these fads are a mere representation of what our minds seem to be curious about. We know we're not supposed to be eating packets of washing detergent, but we are curious about what would happen if. Similarly, there's our obsession with the ripple effect. It's when this small change brings with it a much larger, usually unintended impact. We've always been curious about that shot to seemingly overnight success. From nothing to something, and from the unintended pebble thrown in the lake to the infinitely larger ripple it creates. That curiosity is only magnified when it betters the lives of hundreds of people in that very process. Hi, I'm Akshith, and allow me to walk you through a journey over the past half decade that has done exactly that. From a literal backyard experiment with a noble ethos to now directly benefiting the lives of thousands of people in that very process. To any of us who've been able to guess that to be a palm oil tree, you'd be absolutely right. And before we actually move ahead with the rest of my speech, I think this transition from talking about cute cat videos and weird internet trends to palm oil is relatively unexpected. So just stick with me here as we slowly get to the crux of all of this. Firstly, palm oil is a crop that serves as the lifeline for the families of tens and thousands of farmers across both Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Both of these states have constituted for a whopping 96.98% of India's palm oil production in 2021. And it's likely that while you're not rushing to grab these packets of palm oil at your local grocery store, they're hidden in more than half of packaged products, and they're essential for the process of many industries at their very core. There's a lot more digging you could do about how our nation is currently the largest importer of such oils, the benefits the crop has by needing much less water and resources to grow compared to some other products. But that's definitely not what the 10 to 11-year-old version of myself was thinking about in 2017 when I was first taken to a palm oil plantation on a visit back home. Now I'm realizing that isn't a 10 to 11-year-old me, nor am I really in a palm oil plantation, but I guess you get the idea that I really didn't know what I was doing there. It was the people involved that I was thinking about. My uncles, aunts, parents, and grandparents, alongside the folklore they would tell about the land upon which that oil palm, or anything else for that matter, grew. Be it tales of sheer fortitude and willpower about the struggles working by long hours by the farm, or tales of utter misfortune where it seemed like all was lost. There was a constant through all of this storytelling. A passion so intense and so captivating that its fervor could be felt skin deep whenever any of them spoke. Whether it be in the sort of mundane, with both my parents never failing to remind me about how the money they used to buy me a shiny new PlayStation 4 could have instead bought a quarter of an acre right by the road, or in the not so mundane, with my uncle managing both a career in organic farming and a career in IT. Not all of these stories were equally happy though. Whether it be both my parents trying to explain to me just how hard it is to start an organic pesticides company from their own experience of doing so, or listen to people talk to both my mother and grandmother about how another lake has dried up, or crashing rates at wholesale markets, making it very, very hard to actually have a good harvest. And very often actually swearing in God's name that they wouldn't let their children even come close to laying their foot in the soil of a farmland. When most of these conversations went down, I would be sitting by the corner and just reminiscing about what was being said, and realizing that the same profession that had been spoken about with such purity and such holiness could also leave those who chose to live it feeling frankly betrayed. Be it bad climate, bad rates at wholesale markets, or unfortunately sometimes just sheer bad luck. Most of the time, usually during these conversations, I felt kind of powerless, realizing that there wasn't much that neither me nor anyone else could really do about this fact. It's likely that stories of this sort are common to the more than billion households in India today. At a time of rapid modernization, wherein the ways of life are starkly different across a mere 2 generations, to now and 60 years ago, we're often reminded by our elders of what life was like it before. Wherein the ends of the Rabi and Kharif harvesting seasons, in March and October respectively, brought upon both a time of celebration and worship for blessing our lands with yet another season of favorable harvest. After all, for most of their lives, these people had cared for both their children and grandchildren through the incomes that these farms have provided for them. And so, that fervor in speech, infused with impeccable storytelling, was enough to move a 5-year younger version of myself. Now, move to what extent and which effect, that only time could tell. Or perhaps honestly, time might not tell. We're really considering an 11-year-old, especially one that's pretty erratic, realizing that there's a lot more in life than an urban jungle to actually look forward to. I myself would shun at the possibility that a child being moved led to something, let alone something sizable. Nevertheless, being the stubborn 11-year-old I was, I latched on with a thirst for knowledge pretty quickly. That pebble had now been thrown into the lake. Unaware of the ripples ahead, little me did what I did best. So, that day, manifesting insatiable curiosity coupled with high energy, I asked questions about every single thing I could see in my uncle's farm when we first visited that palm oil plantation in 2017. What is that shed by the east end? I asked my uncle. A surplus storage, if and when we need it. Then what are those pipelines in some of the other farms for? That is drip irrigation. It's automatically sensitive to time, vastly helpful and very easy to use. Then uncle, what is the brown sludge that I've just stepped foot in? I'm afraid that's manure. Anyways, here's what I learned about palm oil that day, summarized and condensed with a little bit less of that unhelpful questioning and a little bit less of that shoe cleaning. Now, before we actually get to this cycle, unless you're planning on heading straight to agriculture the moment you walk out of this room or click off this video, not every detail here will be of utmost importance. But there is something in this entire cycle that caught 2017 Akshith's eye. Just take a look to see if it catches your eye too. Firstly, palm oil harvesting is a lengthy process that requires both patience and care. For the first 3 to 4 years after planting a shrub, which you will need to buy, don't expect any sort of harvest. Secondly, while we did discuss that palm oil does need comparatively less water, it still does. So make sure you set up a system at hand that ensures so. Thirdly, there are both a number of diseases and insects that can hurt the rate of growth and the quality of produce itself. And while there were a number of solutions on hand, most of them have tended to be artificial, and even more so in 2017. Next, you'll actually need some help as the plant grows in height year on year to actually pluck these bunches of palm oil fruit off the tree. The bunches that you have should look a little something like this in the 5th step. Notice how they're encased in this sort of extra covering, similar to that of like a stalk of a banana bunch in some sense. Lastly, just sell the entire bunch to an oil mill and just hope for the love of God that you make a profit. The oil mill will pluck the fruits out of that encasing and go through a multi-step process to actually extract the oil out of them. That encasing, however, which constitutes roughly some 15% of what you sell to them, is not left to waste. It is shredded, processed, and then sold to these boilers who use that to create pretty inefficient electricity, and even more inefficient when it's used in its natural form at high moisture contents. Before we figure out what's wrong with this entire cycle, I hope you're able to at least take a moment to appreciate not only the constant process that this follows, but the complex supply chain after all of this. Farmers, the mills, the wholesale markets, and then the supermarkets, and at the end of it all, you and me, a pretty average consumer. Right, so let's actually try to figure out what's wrong with this entire cycle. steps 1, 2, 4 and 5 don't really seem to be issues in any sense. And while step 3 was a concern, it seemed to be the case with almost every sort of plantation around the world. So that wasn't particularly new to me either. Step 6, however, what was odd about that so-called 6th step was that when my uncle, or anyone else for that matter, could just tell me that using these empty fruit bunches, which is what we call them after the fiber has been shredded, is inefficient for the production of electricity, why couldn't we just do something about it? Now, whilst I didn't spend 200 days by the side of the farm, here's what my 6th grade science teacher and textbook did teach me. That which grows in the soil ultimately nourishes it. Simply put, it doesn't seem stupid to assume that these empty fruit bunches could be used as pretty efficient compost, since at the end of it all, these empty fruit bunches are also organic matter. So, we actually put our backyard hypothesis to the test and got to work on a sort of 6-month pilot experiment. The palm oil mills that we previously discussed about didn't really care about who bought that shredded fiber as long as we were able to sell it and they were able to sell it. So we got some from a local mill. That's how it looked initially when we bought the shredded fiber from the palm oil mill, and that's how it looked at the end of it all. After allowing it to compost for 6 months with a mixture of soil, earthworms, and the sort of composting techniques that we've at least somewhere heard of. Suffice to say, hopes were high by just looking at that end product. So we had obviously gone ahead and tried to utilize this as compost within palm oil plantations themselves. I think it seems like the most sensible, right? Trying to use decomposed palm tree matter for palm trees themselves. And the results that we had were very promising. So what we did was we sort of initially spread it around the palm oil trees, a little something like this. And the results we noticed were multifold. Apart from firstly aiding with weed suppression, we noticed some roughly 15 to 20% increase in yield, a 40% decrease in the amount of water that was used, and a 50% reduction in the amount of fertilizer that was being used. We just used something that looks like it belongs in a trash can and have had to spend less resources whilst having better yields. So, naturally, I wanted to share what we've been able to discover with the rest of the world. Few hundreds of meetups with farmers across the Khammam district over the past 5 years. What we learned was that the numbers would quickly add up as all of these farmers tried to adopt this method. The first year back in 2017, we clocked some roughly 150 tons worth of this compost that was being bought by farmers instead of boilers. And let's just skip back to the present now, in 2023. My uncle primarily, and I whenever I'm back at home, have been doing the same thing of communicating this method that we've both now tried and tested. So just take a moment to reflect upon what that number might have reached in 2022. Think about it. I was 11 years old and around the end of 2017 when I first heard the number 150 tons, and I was absolutely shocked. 150 tons or 150,000 kilos was vastly successful by any standard for the experiment of an 11-year-old. So you might be thinking that around 800 to 1,000 tons seems reasonable after around 4 to 5 years. Seems sensible, right? You think so, but the numbers on the paper clearly disagree. 2, 5, 0, 0, 0, or 25,000 metric tons worth of this compost was used in 2022 and was being bought by farmers like my grandparents within their own farms. That's a number that's quite literally through the roof. And so obviously it's hard to sort of understand this number because 25,000 tons is a number that our human mind wasn't really designed to understand. So let me try to put that into a bit of perspective. 25,000 metric tons or 25 million kilos is the same weight as 41,666 Tata Nano cars, the same weight as 166 massive blue whales, or the same weight as 367,647 average adult human beings. So naturally, when my friends asked what I'd be speaking about today, I explained all of this to them. And most of them had the sort of same advice. Everyone usually asked me to switch to something that more people could relate to, right? What was relatable about palm oil? So, answering their question, what ideas worth sharing did a mere composting technique seem to have? To distant relatives of mine who've been able to double down on their financial savings while having to spend 50% less on fertilizers, it were ideas of financial freedom. To environmentalists who've been able to witness the redirection of resources that were previously responsible for a large carbon footprint, it were ideas of hope. And to me, it proved something even more relevant. Apart from obviously seeing my loved ones have directly better lives due to this, it signified something more. Now, one thing that you have to realize is that when I was 11 years old, and I proposed this idea to both my dad and uncle initially, I had absolutely no clue what I was saying. Matter of factly, if I had visited the palm oil plantation now for the first time at 15 years old, it's very, very likely that I wouldn't even have said what I was thinking about. As we grow older, we tend to put ourselves into this mold that if we don't know a lot about a certain subject, it's best if we keep our mouth shut. That erratic energy and naivety of myself that I described from 5 years ago was the sole reason any of this happened in the first place. So let's go on a little bit of a tangent here. When you're programming, and which is what I do with most of my nights, there's this sort of unspoken rule that if you ever encounter a bug that for God's sake cannot figure out, the best thing to do is leave the desk and then get back to it with a fresh set of eyes 30 minutes later. And so many times with myself as well, it's worked absolutely wonders with me just knowing the solution somehow. And that's exactly the same thing that's happened here. There's two professionals here in the form of both my uncle and dad that have been working in spaces like these for over a decade. But it turns out that an 11-year-old who lived for barely a decade is capable of delivering that same level of insight. Marvels happen when you get a fresh set of eyes on a problem at hand. It ensures that the pebbles you throw have ripples that are truly infinite in effect. Thank you.